I sat in that cold, sterile courtroom, my fingers gripping the edges of the wooden table in front of me. My mind was a battlefield, torn between anger, disbelief, and the hollow ache of betrayal. And then she walked in. My ex-wife. Well, almost ex. Delilah had always carried herself with a certain arrogance, a confidence that had once been intoxicating. Now, it was suffocating. She strode through the courtroom doors with her head high, a triumphant smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. But it wasn't just her presence that made my stomach churn, it was the unmistakable swell of her stomach. She was pregnant. I felt my breath catch in my throat, my pulse hammering in my ears. The last time we'd been together as husband and wife, she wasn't expecting. This wasn't my child. That much was obvious. But that didn't seem to matter to her. I could see it in her eyes. She thought she had just played her winning hand. Delilah had always been strategic, manipulative, even. She knew how to bend a situation to her advantage, how to make herself the victim in any scenario. And now, here she was, flaunting a pregnancy that had nothing to do with me, hoping it would sway the judge in her favor. It made me sick. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. This was just another one of her games. She thought she could secure a larger financial settlement, maybe even some kind of support, by making herself appear helpless. A struggling mother to be abandoned by her cruel ex-husband. It was a brilliant move, really. If I hadn't spent years unraveling the truth about her, I might have actually believed it. The betrayal still burned, even after all this time. I had loved Delilah. More than anything. I had built a life with her, trusted her, believed that we were in this together. And then, one random evening, my world had shattered. I remembered it like it had just happened yesterday. The late nights, the whispered phone calls, the way she had started treating me like a roommate rather than a husband. I had ignored the signs at first, chalking it up to stress, to routine, to anything other than the truth that was staring me in the face. And then I found the messages. Thousands of them. Flirty, desperate, intimate words exchanged between my wife and another man, a man I didn't even know existed until that moment. My hands had shaken as I scrolled through them, my stomach twisting with every new revelation. The worst part? She didn't even try to deny it. I was going to tell you eventually, she had said, her tone casual, as if she was discussing weekend plans. Eventually. As if my life wasn't worth honesty. As if I was nothing more than an obstacle she was planning to step over when it was convenient for her. The months that followed had been hell. The arguments, the empty apologies, the way she twisted everything to make me feel like I was the one who had failed her. And now, here we were, standing on opposite sides of a courtroom, her belly swollen with another man's child, and she still had the audacity to act like the victim. I exhaled sharply, my fingers loosening their grip on the table as the judge entered the room. This was it. The final step in ending the nightmare she had dragged me into. And yet, I had no idea that the worst was yet to come. Because just when I thought she had nothing left to surprise me with, the judge asked a single question that changed everything. The courtroom fell into a tense silence as the judge settled into his seat, flipping through the thick case file in front of him. I tried to focus, but my mind kept pulling me back to the years I had wasted on Delilah, back to the moment I realized the woman I loved had been living a double life. I had thought this day would bring relief, freedom, the end of the nightmare. But now, staring at my visibly pregnant almost ex-wife, I realized she had one last move left on the board. She actually thought this would work. Delilah shifted in her seat, adjusting her maternity dress in an exaggerated motion, her hands resting on her stomach like a shield. She wasn't even trying to hide it. If anything, she was flaunting it. My lawyer, Greg, leaned toward me, speaking in a low voice. She's playing for sympathy, trying to get the judge on her side. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. That much was obvious. But what I didn't understand was why she looked so confident. What was her angle? The judge cleared his throat. Miss Calloway, he addressed her formally. I see there have been some late developments in this case. Delilah clasped her hands together, her voice dripping with carefully measured emotion. Yes, Your Honor. I just want to make sure my child is taken care of. This process has been overwhelming and She paused, casting a calculated glance in my direction. And painful. I nearly scoffed. Painful? She had the nerve to sit there and call this painful? The judge, an older man with years of experience, didn't react to her theatrics. Instead, he flipped another page in his notes, tapping a finger against a highlighted section. Miss Calloway, he repeated, adjusting his glasses. You are requesting financial support based on your pregnancy. Is that correct? My stomach twisted. There it was. She nodded, her expression a perfect mask of quiet suffering. Yes, Your Honor. I just don't know how I'm going to manage on my own. I thought we were building a life together, and then she exhaled, blinking rapidly like she was on the verge of tears. Lies. Every single word. The judge didn't flinch. And just so we are absolutely clear. He leaned forward, his voice steady, deliberate. Is the child biologically Mr. Calloway's? The room went silent. For the first time since she walked in, Delilah's mask faltered. It was brief, just a flicker of hesitation, a microsecond of panic, but I saw it. And so did the judge. Greg didn't move beside me, but I could feel his satisfaction. He knew what was coming. We both did. Delilah opened her mouth, then closed it again. I could see the war raging behind her eyes, the desperate search for a way out. She hadn't expected to be called out so directly, so quickly. She hesitated again, then forced a wobbly smile. Your Honor, I don't see how that's relevant. The fact remains that It's highly relevant, the judge interrupted, his tone firm. Is the child biologically Mr. Calloway's? Yes or no? The pause stretched so long that I could hear my own heartbeat. Finally, Delilah exhaled, her shoulders sinking. The performance was over. No, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. A slow, heavy silence filled the room. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt something. But all I felt was exhaustion. Greg, on the other hand, wasted no time. He straightened his tie, turning toward the judge. Then, Your Honor, we request that all financial claims based on this pregnancy be dismissed immediately. My client has no legal obligation. I understand. The judge cut in, already making notes. Delilah's face was crumbling. Her hands clutched her belly like it could somehow shield her from reality. She had played her final card, and it had backfired spectacularly. But there was still something nagging at me. Because as much as I wanted to believe this was just about money, I had a gut feeling there was something else she wasn't saying. Something worse. And I was about to find out exactly what it was. The courtroom air had shifted. The moment Delilah uttered that single word, no, the weight of her scheme came crashing down on her. The confidence, the smirk, the self-satisfied gleam in her eyes, all of it vanished. I should have felt relief. Maybe even satisfaction. But instead, I just felt drained. Greg, my lawyer, barely contained his smirk as he turned back to the judge. Your Honor, given this admission, my client has no legal or financial responsibility toward Ms. Calloway's child. We request the immediate dismissal of her support claim. The judge nodded, already writing something down. But then, he looked up. Ms. Calloway, given that this information significantly impacts the case, I need to ask, were you aware that Mr. Calloway was not the father before making your claim today? Another silence. And then, Delilah did what she always did when she was cornered. She played the victim. I was scared, she said, her voice quivering. I didn't know what else to do. I've been under so much stress, and I just thought maybe. She looked around desperately, as if hoping someone in the courtroom would throw her a lifeline. I thought maybe I could still get something to help me through this. Unbelievable. She wasn't even denying it. She was admitting to trying to manipulate the system, trying to manipulate me. I clenched my jaw, my hands tightening into fists under the table. Ms. Calloway, the judge continued, his tone harder now. Do you understand that making false claims in court, particularly in a financial dispute, can carry serious consequences? For the first time, real fear flashed across Delilah's face. She stammered, scrambling for words. I wasn't trying to do anything wrong. But the judge had already heard enough. Your claim for financial support is denied, he stated firmly. Furthermore, this will be noted in the final ruling of the divorce proceedings. Any attempt to bring this matter up again will not be entertained by this court. I exhaled slowly. It was over. Or at least, I thought it was. Because just when I thought Delilah had hit rock bottom, she grabbed a shovel and started digging. Her last-ditch effort. Before the judge could move on, Delilah suddenly straightened, her expression shifting into something desperate yet calculated. If I could just say one more thing, she began, her voice softer, sweeter. I should have known better. I should have expected something. But what came next hit me harder than anything else that day. She turned to the judge, placing a trembling hand on her belly. Your Honor, even though the baby isn't biologically his, I believe he should still take responsibility. My entire body went rigid. What? Greg let out a sharp, incredulous breath beside me. Excuse me. The judge, too, looked unimpressed. On what grounds, Miss Calloway? Delilah turned her gaze toward me. and I saw something there. Something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just desperation. It was something worse. Because, Your Honor, she said, voice trembling just enough to seem believable. He knew about my affair long before I got pregnant. I froze. The judge raised an eyebrow. And how does that relate to his responsibility toward your child? Delilah clutched her stomach tighter, milking the moment. Because he stayed with me. He knew I was seeing someone else, and he didn't leave me right away. That means, she inhaled, voice shaking. That means he accepted it. He accepted me, and now he's abandoning me when I need him the most. My jaw nearly hit the floor. She was insane. I had stayed for a while after I found out about the affair, yes, but not because I accepted it. I stayed because I was a fool, because I believed in trying to fix something that was beyond repair. I stayed because I didn't want to believe that my marriage was over. And now, she was twisting that into some kind of legal responsibility? Greg shot up from his chair so fast that it nearly toppled over. That is absolutely absurd. My client was attempting to salvage a failing marriage, not signing up to raise another man's child. The judge sighed, rubbing his temple. Miss Calloway, staying in a marriage during difficult times does not equate to legally binding parenthood. Your claim is denied. But Delilah wasn't done. She never was. She suddenly turned, looking directly at me, her expression twisting into something bitter, furious. You think you're getting off that easy? She hissed, voice low enough that only I could hear. My stomach clenched. I didn't know what she meant. Not yet, but I was about to find out. And it would change everything. Her words lingered in the air like poison. You think you're getting off that easy? I didn't react. I refused to. That was exactly what she wanted. She wanted me to flinch, to show fear, to give her power over me. But I wouldn't. Not anymore. I had already lost too much to Delilah. My time, my trust, my dignity. And now, she had the nerve to stand in this courtroom, belly swollen with another man's child, and try to trap me into taking responsibility for it? Not a chance. Greg placed a steady hand on my shoulder, a silent reminder to keep my cool. He knew I wanted to lash out, but that was exactly what would work against me. The law was on my side. The judge had already denied her financial claims. She had lost. And yet, something about her expression unsettled me. That wasn't the look of a woman who had just been defeated. It was the look of someone who had one last trick up her sleeve. The whisper that shook me. The judge was already moving on, turning to finalize the last few details of our divorce. I was barely paying attention, my focus locked on Delilah as she leaned in slightly, just enough to ensure only I could hear her next words. You're going to regret this, she murmured, her voice syrupy sweet. I hope you enjoy explaining yourself when the truth comes out. My stomach twisted. The truth? What the hell was she talking about? I kept my face neutral, but my mind was already racing. What truth was she hinting at? I had done nothing wrong. She was the one who had cheated. She was the one who had lied. She was the one who had gotten pregnant by another man and tried to pin it on me. There was nothing she could say that would change that, right? Greg must have noticed the slight shift in my posture, because he leaned in and whispered, "Don't engage. Let her dig her own grave." He was right. I needed to let it go. But something about the way Delilah smiled, the smug way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she sat up straighter as if she had already won, made it impossible to ignore. The bombshell revelation. The judge wrapped up the final formalities, his voice a distant hum in the background. And then, just like that, it was over. Legally, I was free. But as I stood to leave, Delilah suddenly turned in her seat, loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. Your Honor, she said innocently. I just wanted to make sure that my soon-to-be ex-husband will also be relinquishing his rights to our frozen embryos. The room went silent. Every muscle in my body locked up. My breath hitched in my throat. What the hell? Greg stiffened beside me, his expression darkening instantly. The judge blinked. I'm sorry, Miss Calloway. Could you clarify? Delilah gave me a sickeningly sweet smile before turning back to the judge. Of course, Your Honor, she said, her voice dripping with fake innocence. My ex-husband and I had embryos frozen during our marriage as part of our fertility treatments. I just wanted to make sure he's formally waiving his parental rights, so I don't run into any legal issues in the future. I could not breathe. Embryos? We had never gone through fertility treatments. That was a complete lie. Except, a memory suddenly slammed into me. A year before everything fell apart, Delilah had suggested freezing embryos, just in case. She said it was a precaution, something a lot of couples did. But I had brushed it off. We weren't even trying for kids, so why would we go through something like that? She had let it go. Or at least, I thought she had. Now, I wasn't so sure. I swallowed hard, my entire body ice cold. Had she actually done it? Had she gone behind my back and... Greg recovered first. Your Honor, my client has no knowledge of any such procedure. Furthermore, if embryos do exist, we request full documentation from the fertility clinic. Delilah's smile didn't waver. She had planned this. Oh, of course, she said smoothly. I have all the records. I'd be happy to provide them. I wanted to scream. Because the way she said it, the way she already had everything ready, meant only one thing. She was telling the truth. At some point during our marriage, without my knowledge, she had undergone fertility treatments using my genetic material. And now, she was holding it over my head. The ultimate trap. I was reeling. Greg turned to me, his voice low but urgent. We need to get ahead of this. If she actually has embryos, she could file for child support if she uses them. Child support. For children I never consented to having. For embryos I never even knew existed. I turned back to Delilah, my blood boiling. You're insane, I whispered. She just smiled. I always plan ahead, darling. I clenched my fists so tightly my knuckles ached. This wasn't over. Not even close. Because Delilah had just made one crucial mistake. She assumed I'd just accept it. She assumed I'd roll over and let her control the narrative, just like I always had. But this time, she had gone too far. And I was about to turn the tables on her in a way she never saw coming. I stared at Delilah, my mind spinning so fast it felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into the abyss. She was enjoying this. She had spent the last year scheming, twisting every moment, every weakness I had, into a weapon. And now, she was sitting there, pregnant with another man's child, smug as hell, while she dropped a nuclear bomb on me in open court. Frozen embryos. My frozen embryos. Ones I had never agreed to. It was insane. I had dismissed the idea when she first brought it up during our marriage. But now, staring at her, I realized what I should have known all along. Delilah never needed my permission to do anything. She just did whatever the hell she wanted, consequences be damned. And now, she thought she had me trapped. I clenched my jaw, refusing to react. That was what she wanted, to see me panic, to see me lose control the way she had always managed to push me to in private. But this wasn't a screaming match in our living room. This was a courtroom, and the law was on my side. Greg, my lawyer, recovered quickly. Your Honor, my client was unaware of any medical procedure involving the use of his genetic material. We request full documentation and an immediate injunction to prevent any use of said embryos until legal ownership is determined. The judge gave Delilah a pointed look. Miss Calloway, do you have proof that Mr. Calloway consented to this procedure? Delilah's confident smile twitched just slightly. For the first time, doubt flickered in her expression. She shifted in her seat. Well, I mean, he did know about it. No, I cut in, my voice sharp. I didn't. Delilah's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing. You're really going to sit there and lie? She hissed. Mr. Calloway, the judge said, addressing me, to be clear, did you at any point sign documentation consenting to fertility treatments that resulted in the creation of embryos? No, Your Honor, I said, my voice firm. I never consented to anything like that. I never even knew she went through with it. The judge nodded. Then until proof of legal consent is provided, Ms. Calloway, you have no claim over Mr. Calloway's parental rights in regard to the embryos. Delilah's mouth opened, then shut. She was fuming. This was not how she expected things to go. Greg pressed on. Furthermore, Your Honor, given Ms. Calloway's previous attempt to manipulate the court by falsely implying my client was the father of her unborn child, we request that all medical records relating to this case be examined for any further discrepancies. Boom. Delilah's entire body stiffened. That was it. That was the crack in the foundation. Because Greg had just thrown the entire legitimacy of her claim into question. The judge sighed, rubbing his temple. Ms. Calloway, given the circumstances, I will be issuing a formal review of all medical records related to this case. If there is any evidence of fraud or misconduct, you will be held legally accountable. I expected her to fight. I expected her to double down. But instead, for the first time, Delilah looked genuinely scared. The secret I was never supposed to know. Court adjourned shortly after, but the second we stepped out of the courtroom, Greg turned to me, his expression sharp. We need to get ahead of this, he said. There's something she's not saying. Something big. I nodded, my chest still tight with rage. I know. And I was going to find out exactly what it was. That evening, I started digging. First, I called every fertility clinic in the city, posing as a potential client. I needed to find out if my DNA had been used somewhere. Most places refused to give me any information, citing confidentiality laws. But then, after hours of calls, I finally hit something. A receptionist at one of the high-end clinics hesitated when I gave my name. That name does sound familiar, she murmured. I gripped the phone tighter. Is there a way to confirm that? Not without a legal request, she said. But if you have any documentation, I might be able to direct you to the right department. I thanked her and hung up. That was all I needed. Delilah had done something. Now, I just needed to prove it. The message that changed everything. It was nearly midnight when my phone buzzed with an incoming message. I frowned. No one texted me this late. But when I saw the sender's name, my blood ran cold. It was Troy. Troy was Delilah's ex. The one she had cheated on me with. The real father of her baby. And all he sent was one sentence. You have no idea what she's capable of. My hands tightened around the phone. I stared at those words, my pulse hammering. Because deep down, I knew he was right. Delilah wasn't just manipulative. She wasn't just a liar. She was dangerous. And I was about to find out just how far she had gone. I barely slept that night. Troy's message had burned itself into my mind like a brand. You have no idea what she's capable of. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to tell myself it was just another game, another attempt to stir the pot and drag me deeper into this nightmare. But the truth was, I already knew Delilah was capable of terrible things. I just didn't know how far she had gone. And now, I had no choice but to find out. The call that opened the floodgates. The next morning, before I even had my first cup of coffee, my phone rang. It was Greg. I got a call from the clinic, he said, skipping the pleasantries. They were reluctant to release anything over the phone, but when I told them we'd be submitting a formal request for records, they finally gave me something. I sat up straighter. And Greg exhaled. She did go through fertility treatments, but here's the kicker. She listed you as the sperm donor. My stomach dropped. What? She forged your signature, Mike. His voice was grim. She told them you agreed to it. The paperwork was signed under your name, but I checked the official records. The signature isn't yours. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't just lying. This wasn't just manipulation. This was fraud. How many embryos? I forced myself to ask. Greg hesitated. 2. Both viable. 2. There were 2 potential children out there, created without my knowledge, without my consent. And Delilah had been sitting on this information, waiting for the perfect moment to use it against me. My hands clenched into fists. That's why she was so smug in court. That's why she was so sure she still had leverage. She had been planning to use those embryos as a weapon, a way to keep me tethered to her, to force me into a legal battle that could drag on for years. And if I hadn't fought back in court, if I hadn't pushed for documentation, she might have gone through with it. She might have had my children without me ever knowing. Greg's voice snapped me back to reality. We can use this, Mike. The fact that she committed fraud means we can file for an immediate injunction. If she tries to use those embryos, we can take legal action. I swallowed hard. She's not going to stop, I muttered. She's always one step ahead. What if she's already? I couldn't even finish the sentence. Greg must have sensed my panic. That's why we need to move fast. I'll get the paperwork started today. I barely managed to thank him before hanging up. And then, before I could even process what had just happened, my phone buzzed again. It was Troy. The truth about her unborn child. I hesitated before picking up. The last person I wanted to talk to was the man who had slept with my wife behind my back. But something told me he wasn't just reaching out for no reason. I answered, "What do you want?" There was a pause on the other end. And then, finally, he spoke. "She told me the baby was mine," Troy said quietly. "But I don't think that's true." I sat up so fast I nearly knocked over my coffee. "What the hell are you talking about?" "She lied to you, man. She lied to me too. I thought it was just a fling." But he exhaled sharply. "She's been messing with both of us. I don't think the baby is mine." I rubbed my temples. "Then whose is it?" Silence. And then, in the smallest, most hesitant voice, Troy said, "I think she doesn't know." A sick feeling settled in my gut. I had assumed Delilah's affair was with one guy. That Troy was the only other person in the equation. But now, hearing the doubt in his voice, I realized how wrong I was. If Troy wasn't the father, then that meant there were others. Delilah had been playing all of us. She's dangerous, man, Troy continued. She's not just some manipulative liar. She plans things. She's careful. And I don't know what her endgame is, but I know this, she's not done with you. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I wanted to believe that, after court, I was finally free. That she had no more tricks left. But deep down, I knew better. Delilah never lost. And if she did, she made sure someone else paid the price. The night that changed everything. I barely had time to process everything before my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering. Hello, Mr. Calloway? It was a woman's voice, polite, professional. Yes. My name is Sandra. I work at Crestview Fertility Clinic. I just wanted to follow up regarding the embryos we have on file for you and your former spouse. I froze. Greg had said he'd file an injunction, but why was the clinic calling me directly? Yeah, I stammered. What about them? There was a pause. And then, in a carefully measured voice, Sandra said, I just wanted to confirm your wife's recent request. My blood turned ice. What request? I asked slowly. Sandra hesitated. She called us yesterday, Mr. Calloway. She said she was moving forward with implantation. I nearly dropped the phone. She was trying to have my child. Right now. Even after everything, after the trial, after the lies, after being caught in fraud, Delilah was still going through with it. She had waited until the courtroom doors closed. She had waited until she was out of the judge's sight. And then, she had gone straight back to the clinic and tried to get pregnant with my child. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. And worst of all, she might have already succeeded. I couldn't speak. My grip on the phone tightened, my knuckles white as I struggled to form a single word. What do you mean she's moving forward with implantation? I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. The woman on the other end of the line, Sandra, from the fertility clinic, paused. It was the kind of pause that made my stomach turn, the kind that meant she was trying to figure out how much she could legally tell me. She called us yesterday, Sandra finally said. She requested an immediate implantation procedure. Since the embryos are already viable, it wouldn't take long for. Stop. I cut her off, my head spinning. You're telling me she was able to do this without my consent? Sandra hesitated. Well, she did provide documentation that indicated prior consent. I nearly threw my phone across the room. Fraud. She had faked my signature again. Even after everything, even after getting caught in court, she still thought she could get away with this. I shot to my feet, pacing the room as my heart pounded. Listen to me, I said through gritted teeth. I never consented to any of this. I need that procedure stopped immediately. Sandra exhaled. I understand, Mr. Calloway. Given the circumstances, I will flag the request and inform our legal team. But if the procedure has already begun. I stopped pacing. My breath caught in my throat. What do you mean, if it's already begun? Sandra hesitated again, and that silence told me everything. Delilah hadn't just called to ask about the embryos. She had already gone through with it. I gripped the edge of the counter, my body shaking with rage. She did it. She actually did it. She was carrying my child. The call that changed everything. I hung up on Sandra without another word. My mind was a hurricane of rage, disbelief, and something else I didn't want to name, fear. Greg. I needed to call Greg. My fingers fumbled as I dialed his number, my pulse hammering in my ears. Mike? Greg answered on the second ring. She did it, I breathed. She implanted the embryo. Silence. Then, Greg cursed under his breath. That's impossible. We filed the injunction. Apparently, it wasn't fast enough. Greg exhaled sharply. This is bad. This is really bad. If she's pregnant with your child, she can come after you for legal rights. Child support. Custody battles. She could make your life hell for the next 18 years. I squeezed my eyes shut. I already knew that. I knew Delilah had just pulled the ultimate move. I had thought I was free of her. I had thought I had one. But now? Now, I was legally bound to her in the most permanent way possible. I had to sit down before my legs gave out. My mind was racing through every scenario, every possible outcome. Greg was still talking. We have to act fast. If we can prove fraud. But before he could finish, my phone buzzed again. And when I saw the name on the screen, my stomach twisted into a knot. Delilah. The trap was set. I should have ignored it. I should have let it go to voicemail, let Greg handle everything. But I was too angry, too furious to let her have the last word. So I answered. Well, Delilah's voice purred through the phone. I was wondering how long it would take you to find out. I gritted my teeth. You really think you're going to get away with this? She laughed. Laughed. Oh, Mike, she sighed. You've always been so predictable. That's why I knew exactly how to play this. My fists clenched. You committed fraud. You think that's not going to catch up with you? She was silent for a moment. And then, in the same sweet, condescending tone she always used when she knew she had control, she whispered, I don't care. My breath caught. She continued, Go ahead. Try to fight it. By the time the courts figure it out, I'll already be too far along. And then? Well, she exhaled, her voice dripping with satisfaction. You'll have no choice but to be in my life. Forever. My skin turned to ice. That was it. That was her endgame. She never cared about child support. She never cared about the court battle. What she wanted was control. She wanted to own me. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. You think this means you win? I don't think, she murmured. I know. And then she hung up. I sat there, gripping my phone so tightly it hurt. My mind screamed at me to react, to fight, to yell, to break something. But I knew that was exactly what she wanted. No, I would not play by her rules. If she wanted to trap me, she was going to learn something the hard way. She wasn't the only one who knew how to play dirty. I sat there, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. This was it. Delilah thought she had won. She thought she had me backed into a corner, trapped in her twisted little game forever. But she made one fatal mistake. She underestimated me. The plan that changed everything. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Then I called Greg back. She thinks she's won, I said the moment he answered. She thinks I'm just going to accept this. Greg was silent for a moment. What are you thinking? I exhaled slowly. I want to flip the script. Greg chuckled. Now we're talking. For the next few hours, we strategized. Delilah thought she had covered her tracks, but she had been sloppy. Too arrogant. Too sure of herself. But I had something she didn't, the truth. Greg filed an emergency legal motion that night. Fraud charges. Misuse of medical records. False claims in court. He even pushed for an immediate paternity test on her current pregnancy, just to expose all of her lies. Delilah had spent years manipulating people. Lying. Twisting reality. But now? Now, the walls were closing in. The courtroom showdown. 2 weeks later, we were back in court. Delilah sat across from me, her usual confidence cracked. She had expected me to disappear, to accept defeat. She hadn't expected me to fight back. The judge wasted no time. Ms. Calloway, he said, flipping through his notes, after reviewing the evidence presented, this court finds significant misconduct on your part, including fraudulent use of medical records and attempts to falsify legal claims. Delilah swallowed hard, her nails digging into her palm. The judge continued, as a result, all parental claims Mr. Calloway might have had over these embryos are hereby nullified. Furthermore, given your repeated attempts to deceive the court, you will be responsible for all legal fees associated with this case. Silence. And then, Delilah snapped. This isn't fair, she screeched, her voice cracking. I deserve. You deserve nothing, Ms. Calloway, the judge cut her off sharply. And if you attempt any further legal action against Mr. Calloway, you will face criminal charges. The courtroom was dead silent. Delilah's face was ashen. She had lost. Completely. Freedom. I walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter than I had in years. No more manipulation. No more traps. I was free. Delilah? She was left picking up the pieces of her shattered plan. Her real baby's father, who turned out to be someone neither Troy nor I had ever heard of, wanted nothing to do with her. And as for me, I moved on. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. It took time, but I healed. I learned to trust again. I built a life that wasn't dictated by her. And the best part? I never had to see Delilah's face again. The real victory. Looking back, I realize now, Delilah thought she had control over me. But in the end, she lost everything. And I got my life back.